Good morning, colleagues, and I'm happy to be here. I only went to bed after 1 o'clock as well, but this was rather the cause of the plane arriving only after midnight. And I was nice and went to bed then, rather than answering Colin's SMS message and going somewhere into town. I'm also somewhat older than most of you, I suppose, and I need my sleep. And just to be a bit reminiscent, what was it, 15 years ago, I was in Colin's role, so we had a lot of great youth meetings then as well. And for me, the youth conferences, the youth seminars and workshops are very important for Uni Europa, for Uni as a whole, because this gives you a feeling what international European trade union work is about, and in particular that the workers, the colleagues from other countries are actually not different, but essentially have the same problems. And I always appreciate it when after, as I said, 15 years or so, some colleagues at a conference come to me and say, "Hi Oliver, we haven't seen each other for over 10 years, but I was at the youth meeting. It was a great experience for me, and now I have a role in my trade union." And that is, to a certain degree, also our expectation for you. Get an experience what international trade union work mean, bring it into your own union or your organization and into your union life. It is important. Europe is not consisting of separate states which don't have anything to do with each other, but rather Europe is a common area where in economic terms, in trade union terms, in political terms, everything gets ever closer together. And we were just referring in one of the last questions to the Troika. And the Troika and what is happening here in Greece and in the crisis countries is really evidence for this. Europe is together. The Greek colleagues in Portugal and Spain, we can only solve the problems, the economic, the social problems that exist together. Europeans standing together, and that is a responsibility of the countries in crisis, but as much of those countries who are not in crisis yet. And another point I want to say to the Troika, we were just saying the Troika decides. Yes, it decides, but it does it in a very undemocratic fashion. In 2011, I was here in Greece. I was talking to our finance unions then, and one of the proposals of the Troika was we have to do something about banking bonuses, so let's cut the Christmas money, the 13th salary that the bank employees get. And we were writing to the Commission, to the European Central Bank and the IMF then, and said, look, you don't have any legitimacy whatsoever to force the Greek governments to cut wages. The reply we received was, we are not making any decisions. We are just the nice guys who advise the Greek government, and the Greek government decides. Of course, if they decide differently as we want, they don't get any money. So the Troika's approach is really an approach as a mugger on the street who comes to you and puts a gun on your chest and says, would you be please so kind to give me the money? And then you voluntarily hand over the money. And that is what the Troika is doing, and it's totally unacceptable. And the youth campaign that we are launching today is really showing what we need in Europe. We need more employment, especially among young people. When I look here at Greece, every month or so we give an update on our website on how employment has developed in Europe, and it has been for over a year basically stable. It goes always slightly up. Greece is in the worst situation. We have youth unemployment which is over 50%, close to 60%, and I think 1 month it was even over 60%. And then if you take young women, it is even worse than this. And that is just totally unacceptable. So we have to do something about it, and the youth campaign we are launching gives an indication how we want to do this. I don't want to go into detail, because you as a youth group can tell this much better than I can do. But what is important with the youth campaign, that it's not only one from Uni Europa, but that the European trade union federations have come together to work on this, because it concerns all of us. What I want secondly to point out is the crisis is not only an economic one, but we also have a crisis for trade union rights in Europe. The European Commission in October published a communication which is called REFIT. And it is about European regulation and European law is too burdensome for companies. There's too much red tape. And many people can agree with the fact we don't want to have red tape, but what the European Commission is really doing in this respect, identifying red tape in the first place as labor rights. So it's being here in Greece, it's somewhat a Trojan horse where we talk about red tape and administrative burden, but in fact it is a clear attack on trade unions. And they're sending out now on all new legislation and also reviewing old legislation big questionnaires which basically ask, are the labor rights, employment rights too burdensome for you? Could you please answer with yes? And then there's a little box where you could also say no. And I think that is really important that we are conscious of this. There is an attack of Europe against what we have established. And it's slowly happening. It's not a full frontal attack, but it's an attack where they try, like a salami, chip off one piece after the other of our rights as trade unionists, as workers in Europe, because they want to be more neoliberal, free markets, and so on. We as Uni Europa are fighting this. We are starting also in March, and Cornelia takes the lead in the Secretariat, a campaign on this. The key example of what they are doing is our agreement in the hairdressing sector. In the hairdressing sector, the social partners, employers and us, have concluded an agreement on health and safety at work. I don't know if any hairdresser is here, but hairdressers have the highest occurrence of skin disease among all occupations, and we want to do something about it. And there is a joint view of the employers that we can do something. In some countries we have put this already in practice, and it saves money for the employers, for the social security system, and it guarantees the health of the workers. And the Commission said, no, we don't want this. And this can't work. Health and safety at work is one of the key achievements of the European Union. Nowadays, when you work, most of the rules on health and safety, on occupational health and safety, is really done at European level. That is one of the things where Europe really works. You have common standards which help workers. We are putting out there against the Commission stand which says, and this comes from the hairdressing agreement, President Barroso is going around and saying there's too much red tape, take the hairdressing agreement on occupational health and safety, and his comments is we don't need legislation for the footwear of female hairdressers, we don't need legislation for high heel shoes. High-heel shoes are not mentioned in the agreement anyway, and he goes around in the Bild-Zeitung in Germany, in the Sun newspaper in Britain, so all in the media. And it's just a blatant lie. And when I hear this, I mean, I think we have to pay back with the same, in the same style. So when I go to conferences, I always say, when he talks always about high-heel shoes, he probably has a fetish for high-heel shoes. It is just not acceptable to discuss, as a president, the main representative of the European institutions, in such a style. Now, let me, however, talk about the Services Manifesto. Uni Europa has adopted in October its Services Manifesto. The idea of the Services Manifesto is putting in signposts where we, as Uni Europa, as a European trade union for service workers, want to go over the next years. What we have done is we defined 10 areas, and I won't mention all of you because that is a long list, but I want to pick out some of them. The first one in that respect, we need an investment program for Europe. The ETUC has put forward a proposal in that respect. Over the next 10 years, we basically want that 2% of GDP is invested in our future. We don't want that billions go to banks, and then when we want to invest in the real economy, in the future of our people, there is no money left. This is one of the key demands. The second demand, and this really refers quite directly to the hairdressing agreement I was just referring to you. When we talk about the future of Europe, we don't want to leave it to business and governments. We as trade unions, as civil society, want to be asked. We want to be involved. In particular, in Europe, we have the social dialogue, where we as workers together with employers can make agreements, can make proposals, give guidelines, and be involved in the policy-making process. This has to be strengthened, rather what is the case at the moment is weakened. And this is not only so at European level, we also want to have a discussion at national level that we are listened to, and of course also in multinational companies. Multinational companies are the global players in Europe, the real European players. And very often the situation in multinational companies is still that we only discuss national matters separately in different countries, and the European Works Council, which exists in many companies, they discuss some esoteric European issues, but as long as we say, look, we want to discuss something concrete. You have a European business strategy, so let's discuss a European business strategy. The answer is always no. We don't really have this, it's only national. And the problem, if we don't find this and don't succeed and push all the time, is a situation we have in many of the Central European countries. There, many sectors are dominated by 2, 3, 4 West European multinationals. And when the trade union then goes to the management of such a multinational in, I don't know, in the Czech Republic and say, we want to negotiate higher wages. The manager says, well, look, headquarters in, I don't know, in Milan gave me a certain budget for staff cost, and what we can negotiate now, whether we increase the wages and then cut jobs, or we keep the jobs we have now, but the salaries will change neither. This is not acceptable. And we can only crack this nut if we really together fight. When I look at Central and Eastern Europe, trade unions are quite weak, industrial relations are weak, and legislation is often very weak. What we have to do, we have to organize better. And in several of the countries, the trade unions come to me and say, look, Oliver, how can we actually get young people into the trade union movement? We have the people who have been there for many, many years, but we don't get new young people. One of the part of our organizing strategy is really getting out there and getting young people in there. And I think there also the youth group plays a role. We really have to motivate people to join trade unions, and that I think is also, when I look at another aspect of our youth campaign, is how can we reach out to young people, make sure that they join trade unions first of all, and secondly, how can we make sure that they not only join them, but become activists, people who are really engaged and fight for their rights as workers and for the rights of trade unions. The third element, which is really important for our services manifesto, is we need proper regulation in Europe. And not only proper regulation for a free market, which means basically not many regulation, but we need regulation which also covers labor rights. And the problem of Europe at the moment is there are so many different social security and labor law systems that companies with their highly paid lawyers always find loopholes to screw our social security system and screw the workers. One big example we were discussing with the other European Trade Union Federation is the construction industry. I mean, the example is there is an Irish company which is incorporated in Ireland, which goes to Romania to find construction workers who then work in Holland and are registered for social security payment in Malta. The result was that nobody paid social security in Malta. The colleagues who were working in the Netherlands didn't really get paid properly because Holland has a minimum wage. And in the end, the trade union stood up and said, this doesn't really work. You have to do something about it. And the company actually did. The labor inspectorate came to them. So the company opened for their workers in Romania an account where they had access to the account and the worker as well. They transferred the minimum wage amount to the account, and the next day They got the account details printed out for the labor inspectorate in Holland, and then they withdraw the money again. So the workers still didn't have any money. And afterwards, when the labor inspectorate found out and got back, the company disappeared. So we, together with the unions there, forced actually, not the company, but the company who was actually in charge of doing the construction work and not the subcontractor to pay. But this must not happen. We have in Europe what is called the Posted Worker Directive, which sets out rules what needs to happen if you work in another country. We are now in the process of revising it, and we are in the process there to close those loopholes. The last discussion we had a week ago or so shows we're going in the right direction, but it's still scratching on the surface. So what we really need in Europe, a proper body of labor law that is valid for everyone and sets minimum standards so that companies cannot play off one country against the other, so that at the end the workers don't have any rights. A final key point I want to raise in this context is lifelong learning. You all know you probably have to work until 67 or until 70, so much more than your parents have. And you also know, and you're probably much more flexible than I and others are, that technology changes rather rapidly. I mean, I still remember Walkmans, which was just something really new, or tape recorders, which was still really new, and these things barely exist nowadays. But this is a period of 30 or 40 years, whereas nowadays this is probably shrank in 10. So we, all together, whether my age, your age, we have to adapt ourselves to the new technological requirements, how the world is changing, especially in terms of the new digital age. So what we as trade unions need to demand is that it's not up to us as workers alone to keep up our skills, but that there is a proper infrastructure provided by the state, and in particular by the employers, that we actually can enhance our skills throughout the life. This means somebody has to pay for it, so companies should have an obligation to pay their workers to upskill in line with technological development, but they also have to give them the free time during working time to actually do this. With the Services Manifesto, we want to set signposts. The next step for us, with a view to the European elections, is that we will go to members of the European Parliament and ask, here are our 10 points, please sign up to it. And there you too, as trade unions representatives, come in. We are asking our member organizations throughout Europe to take the pledge and target their national MEPs and candidates to the European Parliament and say, look at the step, at the pledge on the Services Manifesto and sign up. This is our aim. I mean, we hope that we get about 100 MEPs signed up. In the European Parliament, there are 750, so it's a small group. And the next step is when the Parliament then is elected in the summer, next June, afterwards we will contact them, and this will be our network in the new Parliament, where we actually as Uni-Europa can move together with them, lobby them, getting them on our side and feed our issues into the work stream of the Parliament. The Services Manifesto has not only this short-term aim, it's also, as I said, signposts to go forward, and I would say it's signposts on which we put a clothing line. Where do we want to go? What is our vision of the services industry for the next 10 years? And we are starting a project to define this better. What are the major trends in the services industry with which we as trade unions as workers will be faced with? And what are our solutions? And it is establishing basically what the issues are, and then trying out how we as trade unions can handle it, so that we make sure that in this ever-changing world, actually workers' rights and the working conditions and living conditions of employees are improved. Let me finally also say, with Lee, we will be signing later on, I suppose, a joint statement on internships, which I think is increasingly important. because there's just misuse of internships. We cannot accept that young people, especially after they finish their study, their education, are cheap labor by having some rather weird concept of no rules at all in internships, and then they are exploited. That is a good way forward. If you work properly, you should also be properly paid. That we need to change. Finally, with the youth campaign we are launching, it is really important for all of us that you, as a trade union youth, fight for your right place in our organizations, make sure that you get involved, and that also the organizations put the resources aside to reach out to young workers, get them into the trade union movement, and make sure that they can play an activist role. That is a joint effort we have to do together, and I'm really looking forward to working together with you. Thank you.